on the Zero Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. As we continue our discussion of the climate in the wake of the latest in a series of devastating reports about the trajectory of climate change, it's worth asking, what do we need to do politically in this country as a major global polluter? What do we need to do to turn this around? You know, we've been raised on the belief that the public just really doesn't want to do what needs to be done to truly mitigate climate change. Well, I'm hoping my next guest can shed some light on that. She's joined us before. We always appreciate speaking with her. Marcela Mulholland is the political director for Data for Progress, and they've done a lot of polling and research on this topic. So, Marcela, first of all, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me. I feel like a regular now. We check in every time something crazy is happening. So, pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, well, if we check in every time something crazy is happening, we'll be talking a lot. Yeah, thanks so much, and we feel you're part of our family now. But I mentioned that there's this kind of media narrative that the public doesn't want to do what needs to be done to really tackle climate change. Is that correct?
I mean, in light of the findings this week, it's really clear how much we need to do and how quickly we need to do to avert the worst effects of climate change. The researchers of the report called it literally a code red for humanity. So the stakes really couldn't be higher here. And where I work, Data for Progress, we're a polling firm and think tank. So we're constantly really in the weeds of public opinion analysis of the electorate in the United States. And we've been polling folks for years now on this issue of climate and various progressive climate policies. And we find that there really is a broad concern in the electorate for air pollution, water pollution, some of the most worst effects of climate change. And our recent polling actually found that 83% of voters are concerned that future generations will be more impacted by extreme weather events in their lifetimes compared to today. So I think findings like that really illustrate an increased understanding amongst the public that whether or not, they identify as people who care about climate change or not, I think it's increasingly hard to deny things like the wildfires that are happening out west, the heat waves that are affecting people all across the country. And we're seeing our polling kind of reflect those changes in the public psyche.
It's interesting, Marcella, because despite all the dismal news we're getting about climate change, I find that encouraging, because if your house is on fire, at least it's helpful if the other people in the house say, hey, it's on fire. And it's been tough getting the message of climate change across. There's been a lot of political deception. There's been a lot of media deception from the Fox News sphere. And I think our mainstream media that feeds on, on pointless debates makes it maybe it's real, maybe it's not kind of question. So I'm, for example, really glad to hear that 4 out of 5 people in this country, regardless of their opinions on the topic, think there's going to be more of this for future generations than there is today, because of course that's one of the big findings of this code red for the planet, for humanity, is that it's getting worse. It's going to get worse. The question is, what can we do to mitigate it? But we're not on course to mitigate it right now. So do you think I'm crazy to be encouraged by that? Or do you think there really is some good news in there?
I don't think you're crazy to be encouraged by it. I think our political system and people's political identities are really complex. So you can get findings like the one that I just told you about, and that doesn't necessarily always translate to people voting for climate champions at the ballot box. So I would say, to keep that in mind. People don't perceive issues through a siloed lens. I would say, however, I feel like there's a lot of folks who read something like the IPCC report, learn about an issue like climate change, and then just immediately fall to despair. There's nothing we can do about it. The problem
Yes.
big. Other countries are really responsible for it. We don't have control of what other big emitters do. And I really think that's an irresponsible approach to this. The IPCC report does lay out really dismal findings and lays out a really, frankly, scary future that we're spiraling toward. But it also clearly says that strong and sustained emissions reductions would limit climate change. And I think the fact that there still is agency on our part to do something and to push for our political system to finally respond to the climate crisis is really important to keep top of mind. The truth is that it's not too late to do something about climate change, and spreading the narrative that it is or that all hope is lost really only benefits the corporations that are profiting off of creating this crisis. And frankly, the stakes are too high for us to give in to despair. And also, the science says that there is action that we can take to limit the worst effects of this. So I just want to keep top of mind the importance of like maintaining a sense of agency and hope given the dismal context is in this situation.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important, Marcel, and I'm really glad that you emphasized that point because, on the one hand, I've been following the news coverage around this report, and you have the denialists at Fox News who promote, I've seen Fox News headlines that scientists say it's not as bad as, the report makes out, or they'll pick one factor in the report and then say, well, this factor is getting better. And there's, which to me, if you're doing that kind of media work, frankly, I think it's a crime against humanity to mislead people like that. But then you do have a lot of people who are, broadly speaking, in our camp, right? They're following the science. They're intelligent. They, want to make the world a better place. But you're absolutely right. Among people like us, there is a tendency to fall into despair when, obviously we can't make it as if climate change has never happened, but we can change the trajectory of it so that we still have a livable world, and it's not too late to do that, right?
Totally. And I think we live like the years window that we're living in right now is such a unique moment in history, and that like it's potentially the last time in literally decades or hundreds of years where we can prevent some of these feedback loops that climate change can spiral into from happening. And it really is a short window of time. Like our political system, especially in the United States, and the fossil fuel industry have successfully, launched a campaign of misinformation, have bought out politicians to prevent climate action from happening over the last few decades. And that's, extremely unfortunate. And it also sucks that my generation has to kind of bear the burden of the responsibility that our leaders abdicated. That being said, like we still have time to do something, and the window for that time frame is quickly closing. But I personally feel a great deal of responsibility as someone who lives in the United States, one of the countries most disproportionately responsible for creating the climate crisis. I have the ability to be a political actor here and push for policies and push for change, potentially in the last like 10 years where humanity actually can avoid setting into motion some of the feedback loops that I mentioned before. 20 years from now, I still probably would say we still should be able to try to do something to limit the worst effects of this. But the reality is that this report shows that the more we wait, the more difficult it becomes to get ourselves out of this situation. So I really would encourage folks to stay really focused and also to be in community with other people who are trying really hard to do something about this. I think, it's easy to, I'm speaking here like my most hopeful version of self, but the reality is that I also feel despair about this. And often what makes me continue showing up is thinking about all of the folks like yourself and in the climate movement at large who have been fighting this for years and are involved. And I feel like there's so many things letting us down that I don't want to let down my friends in the movement, and being in community with other folks who care about this is really critical because it's not easy. And really all we have is each other a lot of the time. And I would just encourage folks to kind of ground themselves in that.
I love that you said that. I loved what you said about community and about faith. And, you know, you also, by the way, nailed why I call this show the 0 hour, because this is literally like, this is it. You know, this is make or break. Obviously we can do things 20 years from now if we fail, but this is so important. It's such an important moment. So I love that you said that. And uh, I always talk about, in a sense, people like you and I and all our friends and allies in this movement, if you want to look at it this way, we're honored by history, right? Because we happen to be living and doing activism and reporting and data reporting and all of those things we do at a moment when it makes an enormous difference whether we succeed or fail. And that to me, yes, it's a tense time, but it's also a privilege to be alive in a time when we make a difference. You know what I mean?
I couldn't agree more. We're honored by history is a really beautiful way to put it.
So let's talk a little bit about, bringing it down, closing in a little bit to the present political moment. Because, I could talk about this with you all day, but so we've got the Build Back Better proposals, right? We've got the infrastructure bill, we've got the framework, which I still can't exactly figure out what a framework is, but of 3.5 trillion. We've got a lot of debate about what to do about the climate, and you guys have been doing a lot of polling on the public's opinion of this stuff. So not just the broader perception about the trajectory and what future generations are going to experience, but as I recall it from looking at your stuff, just transition polling, Green New Deal polling, other forms of polling. So maybe if you can, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Totally. So, what we were just saying that there is still time to act, and we must do what we can while we can. The perfect thing for us to do as a country would be to use this moment where we have a democratic trifecta to pass a robust climate infrastructure package that sets us on a path to drastically reduce our emissions. And we have a political and legislative window to do that. It's also closing soon. We don't know how long this trifecta. We have the slimmest of slim majorities in the Senate. So it's really crucial that we act as quickly as possible. And where things stand now is that there's what we have are calling a two-track approach. So there's the bipartisan infrastructure package, and there's the reconciliation package that will be likely passed on a party line vote and will allow President Biden to pass kind of the rest of his Build Back Better agenda that wasn't included in the bipartisan package. The bipartisan package includes some environmental and climate investments like replacing lead pipes, making some investments in environmental remediation. But it's by no means at all a package that comes close to meeting the scale of the climate crisis. I would say it's most useful in that it creates the political space for the reconciliation package to happen, because some of the more moderate members in the Senate really were adamant about needing there to be something that happened in a bipartisan way in order for them to shift to a reconciliation approach too. So that's kind of the utility of the bipartisan package in my perspective. And there are some pieces of it that are popular. People do support investments in our hard infrastructure, roads and bridges, et cetera. But really, I would say the main thing that we should be focusing on here as climate advocates is the reconciliation package and making sure that we can get that passed with the most robust climate investments possible. So that's including a clean electricity standard type payment program, including a civilian climate corps to put millions of people to work addressing climate change, making sure that we actually get enough funding to replace all lead pipes in this country. These are the kinds of climate priorities that we really need to make sure make it across the finish line in the reconciliation package. And the good thing is that a lot of those provisions are really popular. I think importantly to note in the polling that I cited earlier, as part of that survey, we asked voters about different provisions in the bipartisan infrastructure package. And like I said, some of them are popular. But importantly, there is broad support. 75% of the voters that we polled think it's important for lawmakers to make investments to address climate change beyond the bipartisan infrastructure framework. So I think really keeping that front of mind, that like the bipartisan package fine, let it move forward, but it can't move forward unless there is a reconciliation package that meets the scale of the climate crisis moving next alongside it and along the same timeline. And I think that's a way for progressives to kind of use their leverage here, which is like, we're not voting for a bipartisan package that doesn't address the scale of the climate crisis if it's not accompanied by a reconciliation package that does. And voters are on the same page there. There is support, like I said, for going beyond the bipartisan framework to do something about climate change.
Well, I know that a lot of progressive politicians in Washington listen to you guys, talk to you guys, read your reports. Even Joe Biden, who maybe is, not exactly a squad member, he's referenced your polling as well. So, do you have any kind of sense, without obviously, talking out of school or whatever? Do you have any sense of whether the more progressive members of Congress are willing to take a stand to demand that there be, in that second reconciliation bill, some aggressive climate action?
Yeah, and I mean, I think I would say the two-track approach is not just something that the progressive wing is fighting for. It seems to be the consensus in the party. Nancy Pelosi has talked about this. Joe Biden has talked about it and then walked it back a few times because I think his Republican friends got upset. But there clearly is a consensus among leadership and the caucus that these two packages need to move alongside each other. Um, and I think there is more enthusiasm than there ever has been in the Democratic caucus to do something about climate change. And I think that really speaks to the way that the climate movement has grown and organized itself in the last few years. The last time we had a chance to pass federal climate legislation was with Waxman and Markey. I think I was in like third grade maybe when this was happening. But it's kind of like folklore in the climate movement that, that situation didn't go as it should have, and we didn't get another chance until now, over a decade later, to pass federal legislation again. And I think in those years in between, the climate movement organized itself better. We grew stronger. We won elections. We elected climate champions like AOC and other members that are really bold and clear about backing ambitious climate action. And the political situation we're in now is way different than it was when Waxman Markey failed. So I feel hopeful about the strength of our movement and our allies in Congress to be able to do something.
Well, that's great to hear. And I really hope that if something comes of that reconciliation bill that is too watered down, there will be people in Congress who will say, nope, we're not going to let this go forward until it really does something about climate change. But Marcela, Mulholland, you guys at Data for Progress are doing terrific work in this area. So thanks for that. And as always, great to talk to you. Thanks for coming on the program.
Yeah, thank you. We'll have to celebrate hopefully once the reconciliation package passes.
I look forward to that. Maybe we can get Sean to come down and join us, but we can all get together. But thanks again. And for those of you listening or watching, we'll be right back. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.